For more on this story, we are joined here in our studio by Christopher Hayes. He is the editor of Washington, D.C. editor of The Nation, a liberal U.S. magazine. You know, the United States has been under a lot of pressure from trading partners like China to rein in spending. It seems President Obama is trying to do that, but many are also, even the Asian markets are already starting to respond with some jitters, questioning kind of the wisdom and whether or not the world is really ready for less stimuli.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, there's contradictory symbols coming in from international markets and from policymakers in China. I mean, on the one hand, Chinese policymakers like to talk tough about how the U.S. needs to get its house in order fiscally. On the other hand, they need the U.S. consumer and aggregate demand from the U.S. in order to sustain the export-led growth that has been the sort of signature of the Chinese economy. I think economists across the board agree that in the short term, it's just insane to pare back domestic spending because you need expansionary fiscal policy. The U.S. has a massive GDP gap and is still at 10% unemployment. And in that environment, I don't think it's good for anyone to be cutting back spending. So
what do you think? I mean, in terms of historical precedent, why is it that when we examine what the president plans to do here, military spending not going to be touched at all, too precious to touch? Why is it that generally presidents feel that this is just one area, the cost of war cannot be targeted in any manner, shape, or form?
You could write a book about that question. I mean, it is very deep in the political culture in Washington, and it's pernicious and toxic and actually really negatively affects the American political system, that military spending just doesn't count as real dollars. So when we have a debate over health care, we talk about cost and benefit. How much is going to cost taxpayer? How are you going to pay for it? When we have a debate about whether we're going to send 30,000 troops in Afghanistan, the Predator drones, the defense budget in general, there just simply is no budget constraint on it. And you're seeing that reinforced with the president saying, we're going to cut spending in all the areas, but the security portion of the budget. Well, guess what? The security portion of the budget, when you take the Pentagon, the Department of Homeland Security, and Veterans Affairs, is about 60% of the discretionary budget. It's where most of the money is. So this is like being in debt to your, on your house and deciding that you're going to, stop your $5 contribution to Catholic charities every week. It's not going to get you very far.
So when you actually look at what is actually being frozen, it is that smaller proportion. But at the same time, it still is going to mean some significant actions on the part of the U.S. Congress as they start parsing what is going to be touched and what is not going to be touched. What is the motivation ultimately then? Because there are serious questions being raised. Markets are responding around the world. What is the motivation as the president prepares to deliver this very critical State of the Union speech?
Well, the motivation is politics. I mean, it's just it's purely symbolic. It's symbolic in the wrong way, but it's symbolic. I mean, we're talking about the amount of money on the table here. We're talking about $25 billion a year out of a $1.2 trillion discretionary budget, right? So we're not talking about a ton of money, A. B, this is, as the reporter from Politico noted, this is essentially this classic tack towards the center, that we hear you about deficits, we hear you about spending. But the fact of the matter is, people say they worry about deficits when the economy is uncertain, but at the end of the day, what they worry about is whether they have a job, whether they can pay off their mortgage. Those are the things. If you produce good economic results, those deficit fears tend to ebb. So I think this is a completely wrong-headed approach. It's putting the symbol above the substance.
All right, Chris Hayes, as always, we appreciate you joining us and giving us some context to all of this. Thank you. Well, turning to Haiti now, residents there